Bienvenue dans International Fest. Jeudi, nous avons un sujet qui est très important que nous allons parler de lui, qui c'est ce dossier immigration. Et je connais un pile dans nos cap show, des amis, famille, ou bien peut-être pas nous tous qui t'a aimé connaître de un pile question sur le dossier immigration. Nous avons avec nous jeudi 3 avocats qui pourraient répondre aux questions ça yo. Et restez branchés, pas changer chez nous, International Fest a retourner dans un petit moment. Parce que nous gagnons très gros show pour nous jeudi. Welcome back. Jeudi, nous allons parler de immigration. And today we have with us three great lawyers, Mr. Makatier, Ms. Chinwe, and Mr. Alberto. And I will let them introduce themselves.
Okay. Thank you, Gardith, for having us here today. My name is MacArthur Pierre-Louis. I'm an attorney in Houston, Texas. Practicing family law, immigration law, wills and estates, and small business and contracts law. And I'm in the law office of Pierre-Louis and Carr, PLLC, in West Houston. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Chinwe Obioha. I'm the owner at Daria Law Firm, PLLC. And our practice is primarily immigration. We handle all family immigration and business immigration. We also handle personal injury cases and also business litigation. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. My name is Alberto Salinas. I've been practicing immigration law since 2007. I'm the owner of the Salinas Law Firm. I practice in all matters of immigration law, including in business, which includes H-1B visas, L visas, family-based immigration, and representing individuals in removal proceedings. Thank you.
Our first question for you today is immigration reform. Okay. Can you please tell us what immigration reform is, Mr. Makatier?
Okay. Well, as my colleagues would agree, immigration reform has been a very hot topic the last few years. There's a lot of politics involved. Many people have many different opinions. Some people send all immigrants out of the country, while other people's opinions might be to grant blanket amnesty. I'm Haitian American, and my family, immigrated here in the 1980s. Under the first Reagan amnesty program. And so I have a very peculiar view on this whole topic. I know that there are many immigration problems in this country, but we need to work together to try to solve it in a way where the Congress and the President can work together, where they're not at each other's throats. But again, it is very polarized sometimes when we discuss this topic.
Okay. What has happened in the last few years about immigration reform, Ms. Chinwe?
I think since this present administration, Obama administration, came into office, he's been trying to push for comprehensive immigration reform. The Senate passed a bill, a comprehensive immigration bill, a few years back, but that bill has not been able to move forward in the House. So hopefully, we all know that it's almost impossible to deport 12 to 20 million illegal immigrants in the United States. So hopefully, something will be done. If not with this administration, maybe the next administration coming in should hopefully pass something.
Very true. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Can you discuss what the president announcement was about in November 2014, Mr. Alberto?
Yeah, so basically last year in November, the president announced, as you all know, an executive action, which is not immigration reform. This is just executive action. Basically due to the failure of Congress to pass immigration reform, as Chinwe mentioned. And some of these programs that the president announced include programs that would help individuals that enter the country when they were young, such as DACA, which is known as DACA, which is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And another program, which is DAPA, that's specifically to help those individuals are parents of U.S. citizen or permanent resident children. So this is in an effort by the administration to help these individuals to come out of the shadows and participate in the community, gain work permits, pay taxes, just as other individuals. Unfortunately, as we all probably already heard, there was a recent court decision that delayed the executive programs to go into further in effect. Hopefully this is only just temporary, and I think the administration feels pretty confident, and a lot of attorneys feel confident as well that this is going to be overturned, and hopefully soon we can have a lot of these programs back into action.
Okay, and we had wanted to discuss another topic in immigration, which is TPS, temporary protected status. After the 2010 earthquake in Haiti, many Haitian American nationals who were living in the U.S. Were granted temporary protected status from having to go back home due to humanitarian concerns. And so we just wanted to touch on this real briefly. For those who might not know, again, TPS stands for Temporary Protected Status, and it was a law passed early in the early 1990s that prevented or that allowed immigrants living in the U.S. The ability to stay here and not have to go back home due to some sort of event. Usually it would be a natural disaster. So that's a quick rundown on what TPS is. But Chinwe, just wanted to ask you, what are some benefits of TPS?
For individuals that have approved their TPS, they're able to remain in the United States without fear of deportation. They can also obtain a work authorization and be able to work and support their family while they're in the United States. And sometimes with approval, they might be able to travel, but they'll probably need to get an advance parole in order to travel. And most times people wonder whether getting approval, or if you're on a path for TPS, whether that impedes obtaining immigration status. The answer to that would be no. You can go ahead if you have somebody that wants to sponsor you for immigration. They can go ahead and submit those applications. It's usually not a problem.
Okay, thank you.
And just to piggyback off that, I know you spoke briefly, Chinwe, on the person who has TPS's ability to travel. Alberto, could you just piggyback on that? What sort of things does one need to do who has TPS who does want to travel?
Yeah, so an individual that has TPS, if they need to travel outside the country, they need to ask permission from the government, which is what you mentioned, advance parole. And this is just a request, an application to the government asking permission because they need to travel outside the U.S. And it's important to note that the reasons for their travel outside the U.S. must be either humanitarian reason or an important business or education related. Maybe they have a sick family member they need to visit. So it is possible to travel outside of the U.S. And it's important to also take into consideration that these individuals that are asking for permission to travel outside the U.S., that they don't have any unlawful presence here in the U.S. because that may complicate the situation and being admitted back into the U.S. So if there's an individual that has that legal impediment, then it's important to visit an attorney because nobody wants to visit family outside the U.S. for an emergency and not be able to return back home.
Well, welcome back. Thank you for joining us. Today we're talking about immigration, but we wanted to specifically turn to the issue of bringing in family over from other countries. Alberto, just wanted to ask you, why do you think it takes so long, to bring relatives in to the U.S. to live here from other countries?
Well, there's several factors that come into play. Obviously, the first one is, the U.S. government, just like any other country in the world, has to have a system in place to limit the amount of immigration that comes into the U.S. So that's part of the reason. The second is, of course, as you know, our immigration laws have been in place for a very long time. A lot of it needs reformation, specifically because if you look at the system that the government has in place, it has certain categories of family members that can immigrate to the U.S. And at that time, sometimes these family members have to wait at least 10 to 15 years, which is a very long time. And I don't think anybody wants to be apart from their family for that long. So that's one of the reasons why we need to reform these laws. And that's part of the reason why there's a lot of frustration with individuals with our current immigration system.
And Chinwe, I mean, could you add a little bit more to that? Just piggyback, what are some of the additional factors that cause there to be such a backlog?
Yeah, because like Alberto said, you have different categories of family members, and the preference is given to immediate family members of U.S. citizens, and lower preference given to maybe lawful permanent resident family members. So all of those factors come into play for each application that is sent in, and then all of those cases have to be approved by each country's consulate, because most of these people, they're coming from overseas. So there are some countries where you have an influx of people wanting to come in, that want to bring their family members. That means the consulate over there will be overwhelmed. So that takes a longer time. And then some other countries that have fewer people. It's a little bit faster, not that it's fast. So you always have to check to look to the bulletin to see for categories, what the application status is and when the time frame that they should expect that their cases will be approved, or when visas will be available,
Gotcha.
Depending on the other categories of visas.
Gotcha.
How easy is it to bring in a parent or a child of a U.S. citizen?
Yeah, well, it would be the easiest and the fastest way of bringing somebody over when there's a relationship, mother, father to child, or the other way around, because that is the most intimate, relationship, and the federal government has pretty much created an exception for that. There's virtually no waiting like there is for siblings, for example. If you are a U.S. citizen child and your parents are overseas, it's relatively quick to bring them over to live here with you. And if you are a U.S. citizen parent and your child is living abroad, well, they're pretty much automatically U.S. Citizens themselves, but to bringing them over is also pretty quick. There's no long visa waiting, process involved, and it just doesn't take that as long as it does for other people.
Can you please explain to us what is asylum? En créole, que nous dit asile?
Okay. Asylum is basically the process, or the application for asylum or petition for asylum is a process that allows a person who has either made it to the U.S. or hasn't made it to the U.S., who is seeking protection by the U.S. government so that they will not be sent back home because they have rational fear that they will be persecuted or they will be forced to endure painful experiences. And it's very similar to the Convention Against Torture. But basically, the typical situation would be where a person in country A comes to the United States to visit friends and family, but they fear being sent back home, going back home, because there might be somebody or some political system in place, or some gang members or some group who's looking to hurt them for their beliefs, for their sexual identity, for their religious ideas. And the process of asylum in this country allows the person to stay here and be protected by the federal government and not have to go back home. And it also allows for them to be able to bring in other relatives to come to the U.S. as well, to live with them. So there's a lot involved. Many people apply for asylum, but not many people get it. But that's pretty much a rough outline of what asylum is.
Okay, thank you. What's the likelihood of getting it, Chinwe?
Like Mark said, it's really a complicated process, and unfortunately, most asylum petitions are denied, and it varies from state to state. So there's really no one way of knowing. But if you look at the stats, some states really have very low approval. An example would be Texas. In Texas, I think less than 30% of asylum petitions are approved. So it really, the answer to that is it depends on where the state where you reside. Some states have slightly better, but overall, it's a very difficult thing to go through, and it's a difficult process, and very few applications are approved.
And my question is, does a person need a lawyer?
Well, it's of course it's not required, but it's definitely recommended. As Chinwe just mentioned, there's a low approval rate for asylum cases. So an individual that does not have an attorney is already facing a pretty high uphill battle. So that's something you need to consider. And other things I need to consider is, if this individual doesn't have an attorney and they're in removal proceedings and they have to present their asylum case in immigration court, this is an actual trial that they have to present in front of a judge. And the government is going to have their attorney. The government is represented by an attorney, and if this individual doesn't have an attorney, then it's going to be very difficult. As Chinwe mentioned, there's a low approval rate. And immigration judge, there's a lot of immigration judges they're very specific how they want things done, and there's local court rules that attorneys are familiar with. So definitely, if an individual has an asylum case, it's definitely recommended that they seek the help of an attorney, because going at this by yourself is going to be extremely very difficult.
Thank you for all your great answers. Nous allons prendre un petit break. International Fest a retourné dans un petit moment. Question sur immigration aujourd'hui a intéressé nous. Et pour nous continuer, we're going to talk about illegal presence.
Okay. This is a general question. Let's assume I'm here in this country illegally. Is there a way to become legal? That's the topic. Alberto, could you discuss for us, what kind of problems an individual who entered here illegally might face when they're trying to fix their illegal status?
Yes, so obviously if they enter the country without permission, that's going to be a problem for them. But assuming that there's an individual in this situation and they have a family member that can petition for him, such as, let's say, a U.S. citizen spouse. This individual entered without permission, they've been here for several years, and they ended up marrying a U.S. citizen. So yes, a U.S. citizen spouse, of course, can petition for her husband, her or his husband. And the only problem is that since they entered without permission, they're not able to adjust status. So that means that they have to leave the country, go back to their home country, and do consular processing. So one of the problems that a lot of people had faced in the past is that since they acquired so much time being in the country without any legal status, that once they have to leave the country, they trigger either a 3-year or a 10-year bar. So what that means is that these individuals are not allowed back into the country after waiting out that time period. So the government also created a waiver to overcome this bar. And like I said, in the past, a lot of these individuals had to wait. They would go back to their home country. They would go to the interview, and the immigration officer would tell them that you're inadmissible because you've been in the U.S. for such a long time without any status that now you need a waiver. So now they're stuck in their home country in legal limbo, waiting approval of their waiver, and sometimes these individuals had to wait months, sometimes up to a year. and without having the assurance that they're going to be able to return. So not too long ago, the government introduced a modification, really, of a new waiver that was introduced that modifies the procedure, how these waivers are adjudicated. So what the government did is introduce a provisional waiver, which allows a lot of these individuals, for example, a U.S. citizen's spouse that petitions their spouse, can apply for this waiver while they're here in the U.S. before they leave the country. So if everything goes well and they're approved for this waiver, then they have more of an assurance that when they go out to the interview, that they're just going to go to the interview, and they'll have to wait a couple of days, of course, and then they're able to return without having to wait outside of the U.S. for such long time, sometimes up to a year, which was before. Mm. So this waiver is only for individuals that have been unlawfully present. Of course, if they have other problems, such as criminal convictions or other things that may make them inadmissible, they won't be able to qualify. They have to, go back to their old procedure, which was, going back to their home country and waiting outside until their waivers are approved. So individuals that qualify for this type of waiver definitely should take advantage of it. And sometimes in a lot of cases, individuals that don't have this remedy sometimes may even be able to be eligible under other circumstances, like VAWA, for example, which is Violence Against the Women's Act. Is that still in place right now?
Yes. Yes, it is.
Can we want to elaborate on VAWA?
VAWA is Violence Against the Women's Act. Because of the title, most times people think it's just applicable to women, but men do qualify under VAWA. And it was a law that was enacted, I believe, in 1994 by President Clinton, and it was reauthorized by President Bush. And then the Obama administration reauthorized it and expanded it to actually benefit same-sex couples. VAWA was actually, what it does is it just created a special provision in U.S. immigration law that allows abused spouses to self-petition or abused child or even abused parent of a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident without that person's provision. We all know that domestic violence is a big issue. And most times, illegal immigrants or even people that came in legally who need, who are spouses of these individuals don't have much choice in terms of a way out if they find themselves while their immigration petition is still pending in a very abusive relationship. So what VAWA does for them is gives them a way out to come out of that abusive relationship and self-petition and be able to have their green cards when it's approved.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, I like this question. Okay, is it okay to lie on your immigration application?
No, it's not okay to lie when you're filling out not just immigration, any application that you're filling out, especially that you're submitting to the U.S. Government, especially with immigration. It's best to answer the questions correctly, and it's best to provide supporting documents that they need in order for your application to be processed on time. Because when you lie, you kind of complicate the whole process, and you could get denied.
Yeah, I agree. I think in this field of immigration, many people who want to come to the country and live with their family members are oftentimes tempted to just not tell the whole truth because they're afraid that it will hurt them by denying them just this natural right people feel like they have of immigrating here. I would say that the truth is always the best defense, and you put the rest into God's hands and don't make any sort of misstatements in the applications. So that's just a good way to live. Alberto, anything else you have to say on
And
that?
not only being honest with the U.S. government, but also being honest to your attorney.
Exactly.
You know,
That's true.
I met with a client last week that they didn't have an attorney, but they didn't answer something correctly in the application. So now they're having to deal with inadmissibility issues.
Yes.
And now they thank God they qualify for a waiver, but now they have to spend so much more money on getting a waiver approved. If only they had been more truthful in the paperwork. And sometimes it doesn't mean that they intentionally were dishonest. They just
don't understand.
They just didn't know it, just misunderstood. So again, also the U.S. government has an extensive database that has a lot of their history. And we don't have access to that.
Yes.
So we rely on the client being honest with us and being honest, of course, to the U.S. government.
Yep.
That's true.
Okay.
Thank you for watching and join us next time. I really want to thank Ms. Chinwe, Alberto, and Mr. Marcatier. Sorry, nous arrivons dans fin show. Moi, j'espère que nous tous te satisfaits sur question immigration yo. Et comme toujours, mon nom est Gardith Cherenfant. À la prochaine. Ciao.